I never imagined the moment would feel so heavy, as if the air itself had turned thick and gray. It was just another morning at the family office, my second home for the past 5 years. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls, the city humming quietly outside, but inside something had shifted. Something subtle, almost imperceptible at first. My sister, Lena, had always been ambitious. I admired her in my younger, more naive way. She had a sharp mind, a magnetic presence, and a way of making decisions that left everyone either inspired or intimidated. I, on the other hand, had always been gentler, more cautious. I believed in patience, in listening, in building trust slowly. I thought that balance was what kept our family business strong. I thought wrong. The day began like any other, with the usual bustle of meetings, invoices, and client calls. I had prepared the quarterly report double, checked every number, confident that it would impress both her and our small team. I had learned to anticipate her mood swings, to step lightly around her bursts of energy, but that morning I sensed something in her eyes, a sharpness I hadn't seen before. We met in the conference room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Lena was leaning against the table, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile when I entered, didn't acknowledge the effort I had put into the report. Instead, she gestured for me to sit. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice calm but icy. "I don't think you're cut out for this business. You're slow, indecisive, too soft. You've always been the weak one." The words landed on me like a sudden winter frost. I remember staring at her, my chest tight, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard it left faint impressions in my skin. Weak me, I had poured every ounce of my energy into this company, stayed late when no one else did, handled clients who were impossible, smoothed over conflicts that could have broken us. And yet, in one sentence, she erased it all. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to shout, "I've built this place with you. Don't you remember that?" But the words stuck in my throat. I realized in that moment that arguing would change nothing. Lena had already decided. Her perception, not the truth, was what mattered. She continued, pacing slowly, as if rehearsing a speech she had perfected over weeks. "I think it's best if you step aside. You can take a break, find something else to do. Let me handle the clients, the strategy, everything." Her eyes were steady, unflinching. There was no cruelty in her tone, just certainty that made it worse. She wasn't lashing out. She was rationalizing my exclusion. I sat there silently, feeling a strange combination of shock and sorrow. I realized then that this wasn't just about business. It was about how she saw me, or maybe how she wanted others to see me. My sister, my family, had decided I was replaceable, unfit, unnecessary. I didn't respond immediately. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet swell around me. The words she had spoken echoed in my mind, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a scene, of an argument. Instead, I nodded slightly, the faintest gesture of acknowledgement. "I understand." I said softly. It hurt more than I thought possible to leave the office that day. Not physically hurt, but an ache deep in my chest, a betrayal I hadn't anticipated. Walking through the streets afterward, the city seemed brighter than ever, yet I felt invisible, detached, as if I were moving through someone else's life. That evening, alone in my small apartment, I replayed the day over and over. I questioned myself, my abilities, even my worth. But somewhere beneath the hurt, a small flame flickered, a quiet whisper that I wasn't weak, that her opinion did not define me. I didn't know it yet, but this moment, this painful, humiliating day, would become the turning point of my life. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew I wouldn't stay broken. I would leave, yes, but I would rise. And I would do it in a way she could never predict. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise to myself. One day, I would reclaim my dignity. One day, I would find a path that was mine, built not on anger, but on quiet strength, and somehow I knew the world was about to test me in ways I wasn't yet ready to imagine. But for now, I simply let the silence in, listening to it, letting it teach me what words never could. The weeks after that day were the quietest I'd ever known. I returned to the apartment I'd always treated as a temporary stop, but now it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could feel something other than betrayal. I didn't answer calls from the office. I didn't check emails. I let the silence grow thick around me like a shield. At first, it hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. I missed the hum of activity, the rhythm of clients and invoices, the small victories of the day. But mostly, I missed the idea of family, my sister, Lena, the person I had trusted, the person who had dismissed me so casually. I replayed her words in my mind over and over, trying to understand them. Weak, slow, soft. They echoed not just as a judgment, but as a challenge, a door slammed in my face that forced me to look elsewhere. I realized then that the silence I had chosen was not emptiness. It was a teacher. I spent hours walking through the city streets, observing people, noticing small details I had always overlooked in the rush of meetings and deadlines. I watched business owners negotiating deals in cafes, saw clients' subtle gestures of trust or hesitation, and began to understand patterns I had ignored before. Every quiet observation sharpened my mind. Every conversation I overheard, every interaction I witnessed, became a lesson I didn't even know I was learning. The first few months I felt lost, but not defeated. I started small, taking freelance projects, consulting, organizing, advising. Anything that let me apply what I knew while keeping my distance from the office that had become a place of betrayal. Each small success felt like a quiet reclaiming of power, a gentle reminder that my skills were real, my instincts valid, my judgment sound. More than anything, I learned patience. Lena had rushed, demanded, acted with certainty, believing that the world must bend to her perception. I learned to step back, to watch, to wait. I let clients, situations, and opportunities come to me, rather than forcing myself into the fight. I discovered that power is not always loud, and that strength often grows in the shadows, away from the scrutiny of others. I also learned about boundaries. People, family, or not, could only go so far with me. I began to notice subtle patterns in my interactions with others, who tried to manipulate, who truly listened, who acted from genuine respect. I realized that respect could not be demanded. It could only be earned and returned. And if someone refused to give it, silence was sometimes the most powerful response. Even so, the ache of betrayal never fully left me. There were nights when I would stare at the ceiling, imagining Lena in the office, managing clients, handling the business I had helped grow. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to explain how wrong she was, but each time I held back. I realized confrontation might provide a momentary satisfaction, but it would never offer the peace I craved. Quiet, observation, and patience were far stronger allies than rage. One day, about 8 months after leaving the office, a call came that shifted everything. A client, one of the biggest accounts Lena had been struggling to manage, reached me directly. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost desperate. I don't know what happened, but we need guidance. The last few months have been difficult. I listened. I didn't judge. I didn't demand explanations. I simply offered advice, solutions, and strategies, the kind I had always excelled at. As I spoke, I realized something profound. Even though Lena had tried to diminish me, my reputation, my skill, and my integrity had quietly endured. The world didn't see me as weak. The world saw me as capable. That day, I understood that silence had given me something anger never could: clarity. I had not only preserved myself, but I had also built a foundation for a future where I could thrive on my own terms. I didn't need revenge to feel vindicated. I only needed patience, intelligence, and time. As I hung up the phone that evening, I looked out at the city lights shimmering against the dark skyline. A quiet sense of purpose filled me, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that doesn't require anyone else to notice. My sister had tried to define me, but she could not, and in that moment I finally felt the first sparks of freedom. Freedom that was entirely my own. The lesson was clear, though it had taken months of reflection to fully understand. Silence, patience, and observation are teachers that can reveal more than confrontation ever will. And sometimes, the most powerful response is the one no one sees coming. The months after that call marked the first time I felt the subtle shift of possibility in my life. No one knew what I was doing. No one watched me. Not my sister, not my old colleagues, not even the clients who now reached out to me. And in that silence, I began to learn a new kind of strength. The kind that doesn't announce itself in headlines or boardroom meetings, but grows quietly in the spaces no one notices. I realized that life had a strange way of teaching lessons only when you step away from the noise. I had spent years measuring myself against my sister's pace, her ambition, her fire, and for years I had allowed her definition of weak to shape my self-image, but now, in the stillness, I began to understand that strength had many forms. Patience, diligence, thoughtfulness, listening, these were my strengths. They were subtle, unassuming, but they were real. And for the first time I allowed myself to value them. I started quietly building something of my own. I reached out to clients I had once managed, not aggressively, not with pride or vindication, but with calm competence. I offered advice, small projects, and solutions tailored to their needs. One by one, they responded not with fanfare, but with trust. They sought me out because they respected my judgment, my insight, my reliability. And in each interaction, I felt the faint but powerful stirrings of confidence returning, rooted not in external approval, but in my own self-assurance. During this time, I also learned to observe human nature with an almost clinical patience. I watched how Lena handled her clients, how she responded to challenges, how her confidence sometimes masked uncertainty. I noticed patterns, the people she struggled with, the accounts she mishandled, the decisions she rushed. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I simply learned. Every mistake she made became a quiet lesson for me. I also became more intentional about my own decisions. In the past, I had been reactive, responding to crises, meeting expectations, trying to prove myself. Now I acted deliberately. I researched markets, I studied contracts, I quietly invested in knowledge and resources that no one suspected. I built connections not for show but for substance. I learned that power does not need to be visible to be real. It only needs to exist, solid and unshakable, beneath the surface. And yet, the hardest part was resisting the temptation to return immediately, to confront her, to announce my capabilities. It would have been satisfying in the moment, I knew that, but satisfaction alone does not create lasting impact. I wanted more than a fleeting victory. I wanted a quiet, undeniable shift that no one could dispute, and that would affirm my own worth without compromising my dignity. One rainy afternoon, as I reviewed a proposal for a client who had been frustrated with Lena's management, it occurred to me that the opportunity had quietly arrived. The client had debt owed to Lena's company, a debt she hadn't yet pursued aggressively. And in that moment, I realized I could make a move not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of careful, measured strategy. I didn't announce it to anyone. I didn't tell my sister. I simply acted quietly, setting the foundations in place, using the patience and insight I had cultivated during my months of silence. The work felt almost meditative, deliberate, precise, and deeply satisfying. For the first time, I understood the true power of being underestimated. No one watched me, but that gave me an advantage they could never see coming. As I closed my laptop that evening, the city lights reflecting on the glass walls, I felt a calm I had never known before. I was no longer the sister everyone thought weak. I was a woman who had learned to move through life quietly, with observation, with patience, with wisdom. I was ready, not for confrontation, not for spectacle, but for the quiet justice that comes when preparation meets opportunity. The lesson had crystallized. The most powerful growth often happens in obscurity, away from judgment and expectation. Emotional strength does not announce itself with anger or dramatic gestures. It lives in quiet resilience, in careful observation, in the deliberate building of something that cannot be taken away. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a strange sense of anticipation not for revenge, but for the natural unfolding of consequences. I had changed, I had grown, and I knew, in my bones, that the world was about to notice whether she realized it or not. It happened quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, a call from a client I hadn't expected to hear from so soon. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was a hint of relief I couldn't miss. "We need to settle the outstanding balance from the past year," they said. "Can you guide us through it?" I paused for a moment, listening. This was the client who had once been Lena's biggest account, the one that had consistently given her trouble. I didn't speak of anger or triumph. I didn't gloat. Instead, I responded with the same calm voice I had cultivated over the past year. "Of course," I said simply, "let's review the details together." Over the following weeks, I worked with them quietly, reviewing contracts, ensuring all paperwork was in order, and setting up a plan to manage their debt responsibly. All the while, I made sure every decision was deliberate, ethical, and professional. I was aware that Lena would eventually notice, but that didn't matter. This wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about honoring the effort and patience I had invested in myself. The day Lena finally realized something had shifted is a day I will never forget. She called me unexpectedly, her tone strained, almost hesitant. I heard you've been working with our client," she said. There was a pause, a crack in her usual certainty. How did you?" I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to boast. I only smiled gently, letting the silence stretch between us. "I've been helping them manage their accounts," I said softly. It seemed the best way to ensure continuity for everyone involved. Her sharpness faltered, replaced by confusion. She didn't understand how I had acquired the knowledge, the strategy, or the presence of mind to step in so seamlessly. And that was exactly the point. My actions hadn't been about undermining her. They had been about quietly demonstrating that competence, integrity, and patience speak louder than any argument or outburst ever could. Over time, I found myself becoming the person I had quietly hoped to be, someone respected not because of loud declarations, but because of careful, consistent action. I didn't seek her approval, but in a strange way, I felt a sense of peace knowing that the truth, my truth, had revealed itself naturally. Lena's assumptions about weakness had blinded her to the very qualities that made me strong, and now the consequences of underestimating me were unfolding quietly with dignity intact. I didn't take over the company. I didn't flaunt my success. I didn't call attention to the fact that I now held influence over her largest account. I simply maintained professionalism, fairness, and calm authority. In doing so, I realized that true power doesn't require spectacle. It doesn't need revenge. It only needs patience, foresight, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, watching the city lights flicker across the skyline, I reflected on everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the months of silence and observation, the careful work I had done without anyone noticing. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction not from hurting anyone, but from honoring myself, my values, and the effort I had invested in my own growth. I understood now that the most profound victories are often invisible. They don't come with applause, recognition, or confrontation. They come from inner strength, self-respect, and the quiet unfolding of consequences that align naturally with truth and integrity. I had walked away once, broken and uncertain, but I returned, not to claim revenge, but to reclaim myself. When Lena and I finally spoke again, months later, there was no anger, no accusation, no lingering bitterness. There was simply acknowledgment, subtle, unspoken, mutual. I could see in her eyes a mix of surprise and respect, though she never said it aloud. And that was enough. The lesson had been delivered not through confrontation, but through patience, skill, and unwavering self-respect. I had learned finally that boundaries are sacred, that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. That emotional strength is built not in moments of rage, but in quiet resilience, careful observation, and thoughtful action. And most importantly, I had learned that true justice often comes not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of choices, patience, and integrity. I closed my eyes that night feeling lighter than I had in years. I hadn't needed to fight, to scream, or to retaliate. I had merely lived, observed, learned, and acted with quiet wisdom. And in doing so, I had discovered something far greater than victory over my sister. I had discovered the strength and dignity that come from honoring oneself, no matter the betrayal or the pain. Sometimes the most profound outcomes are the ones that no one else sees coming, and for me that was enough.